Okay, so we're chugging along and we've got this class and one more class tomorrow. So I'm hoping to try and finish everything. I'll be flying through the material. So I'm probably not going to take any questions. But we can jot it down and leave it to tonight, or after class we can have if you want to ask me then. Okay, so um, let's find, let me just get to, yeah, so yesterday we finished off the meritorious practice of upholding the precepts. So we looked at the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts, and the 10 wholesome precepts. So now we come to the third meritorious practice of meditation. So sometimes, it's translated as concentration. Um, and when you hear the word concentration, remember this is talking about meditative concentration, not just a scattered level of concentration. So here the verse says, desires and joy should not be grasped. Scatteredness drowns one in all sorts of suffering. Grounded on compassion and abide in pure precepts, cultivating concentration yields the greatest joy. So some people think that cultivating generosity is a proactive, wholesome practice that benefits others, while upholding the precepts is merely self-restraint and at best a passive practice of moral conduct. And as for cultivating meditative concentration, some may actually ask, what kind of wholesome merits can come from such a practice? So more bluntly, how can my meditation benefit others? Because it's obvious when we're talking about generosity and upholding the precepts, it's clear how our practice brings benefit to others. So some people will say, well, I'm just sitting there in meditation. How does it benefit you? I'm benefiting in my mind, but what are you getting from it? So to answer this query, we need to bear in mind that in the Buddha Dharma, purification of our mind is actually the fulcrum of our practice. And among all the worldly methods available, only the cultivation of meditative concentration can achieve the goal of purifying the mind. So no matter if we are looking at a political or governing system or religious denomination that uses morals to change people and to guide people, if we are to thoroughly examine the root of morality, we cannot avoid a deep investigation of our inner minds. So for example, Confucians regard managing the family, ruling the country, and bringing peace to the world as the primary responsibility of human beings. And to achieve these goals, they have to cultivate their moral character. And so in the Confucian book, the Book of Great Learning, it says, from the emperor down to ordinary citizens, all should cultivate moral character as their foundation. So cultivation of moral character begins with knowing the difference between good and evil, accumulation of knowledge, development of one's conscience, and sincerity and righteousness. So the crux of this matter lies in one's mind. A mind that is in meditative concentration is pure and free from disturbances of defilements. So I hope you can see that our practice of meditation can actually be beneficial to others. Now, again, in the Book of Great Learning, there is a passage that begins with, knowing where to rest, the goal can then be determined. And this passage continues on and it ends with tranquility, the desired end is attained. So here, tranquility refers to meditative concentration. So this passage is even more clear in terms of how it depicts the mind's process as one cultivates the worldly meritorious practice of meditation. Because remember, meditation is not just exclusive to Buddhism. So why must we cultivate meditative concentration? There are many reasons, but the main reason, according to Confucianism, is that this present human world is full of evil and wrongdoings, and there are two sticking points for this outcome, which can only be remedied with the cultivation of meditative concentration. So concerning the question, why must we practice meditation? One point is desire and joy. So humans are quite reluctant to give up their desires for joy and material objects and so forth. And these material objects include forms, sound, smells, flavors, and tactile objects, all the joys that come with the senses. So this is something that humans generally find hard to give up. Now, towards present desires and joys, humans tend to basically indulge in them if they can, while the past desires and joys, we tend to kind of think back and reminisce on it a lot. And as for the future, people blindly chase after joys that they think will come to them. Now, when these desires and joys are unfulfilled, people still try to seek them tirelessly. And once they are attained, then we have the fear of losing them. And once they are lost, we experience sorrow, and the situation can sometimes become unbearable. So if we think about all the problems in the world, such as social, economic, political issues, which one of these is not a result of our search to fulfill our desires? And desires and joys should not be grasped, for they are like honey on the blade of a knife. So this is a very common simile of one, trying to lick off the food scraps, honey on the blade of a knife. Perhaps in America, you would use peanut butter on the blade of a knife instead. But the idea is that although it's, the honey or the peanut butter is sweet, but if you do that, you also run the risk of cutting your tongue with the knife. So the other sticking point is scatteredness. Now, our minds are generally in a state where there is a level of scatteredness. And at times it can be so scattered that the simile here is that it's even more active than a monkey that's jumping around in the forest. So when the mind is scattered, emotions can become impulsive, and one's cognition can also become blurred and unclear. So when the mind is very scattered, extremely scattered, this actually hinders our ability to comprehend even worldly subjects. So consequently, one becomes unable to control themselves and is easily swayed by their environment. So scatteredness is a very powerful cause for the arising of defilements and incorrect perceptions, which then lead us to drown in the ocean of desires that can also bring us a lot of sorrow and suffering. So in such situations, we can become very unstable, and we can't even save ourselves, let alone saving others. So I hope you can see that with the cultivation of meditative concentration, we can actually break free from the shackles of desires and joy and not be influenced by scatteredness. And in meditation, the mind is in a state of clarity, calm, tranquility, and a wholesome state of concentration is where we can actually then experience more freedom to act independently. Now, when cultivating meditative concentration, we must be equipped with two prerequisites. Otherwise, the resultant practice is likely to be more detrimental than beneficial. So the first requisite is to be grounded in compassion. The motivation to cultivate meditative concentration should not be just to satisfy our curiosity or to fulfill our endless desires or to extend our lifespan, and certainly not to develop supernatural powers. Particularly, some people will, if they hear that they can develop these psychic powers or supernatural powers with deep meditation, they then think they can use that power to take revenge on others. So the motive is definitely unwholesome. When cultivating concentration, our mind must be grounded in compassion, which means that the motivation ultimately should be so that we can bring more joy and benefit to sentient beings with our practice. Now, with compassion, our mental state can become more gentle and harmonious, which is conducive to the practice of meditation. Moreover, with compassion, once we attain concentration, we will not use that mental strength or the consequent supernatural powers to disturb or bring harm to others. Otherwise, the other requisite is to abide in wholesome or pure precepts. So one must commit to upholding the precepts, such as the 10 wholesome deeds and so forth. And in this way, our bodily actions and speech will reflect moral conduct that is wholesome and kind. Now, if our conduct is dishonorable, then our meditation practice can actually lead us to commit more evil and bad deeds instead. And any concentration that we achieve can become what's called deviant meditative concentration, because our motive for it is unwholesome, and perhaps in the end we will use that concentration for evil deeds instead. So the result is that people who practice meditative concentration with unwholesome intentions will end up becoming part of Mara's retinue. So before we begin our meditation practice, we need to reflect on ourselves. Are we motivated by compassion? And have we also undertaken moral conduct development as well? Now, in addition, we should also have the conviction that among all the worldly practices, the cultivation of meditative concentration can yield the greatest joy and benefit. Again, this goes back to the goal. What can I get out of this? If you don't believe that meditative concentration will bring you that great joy, then you won't have the motivation to practice it. Particularly for beginners, when you're sitting there and your legs hurting, your knees hurting, your back's hurting, and the master hasn't hit the bell yet, and you're thinking, when are they going to hit the bell? So meditation practice requires a lot of effort and time. Now, before you begin your meditation practice, you need to definitely make sure that you understand the practice well. Ask the teachers questions. What should you do? There are practical questions in terms of, your physical postures and so forth. And there are other questions you should make clear of in terms of breathing, your mental object of focus and so forth. What to do when you get too scattered and your mind, can't focus and all that. So there is a stage of learning the theory of meditation before you then put it into practice. Otherwise, if you just go to a meditation hall and the master says, just sit on the cushion, but you're sitting there and you're kind of thinking, well, what next? So make sure you're well educated in a lot of the theory behind meditation practice. So once you are equipped with that and you have your conviction, then the practice should become a lot more easier. Now, the happiness that comes from this world is pretty much the joys from the five desires. And among these, the foremost joy would be the intimacy between spouses. However, when we compare the bliss of meditative concentration to all forms of worldly joy, it is far more superior. Now, the bliss and happiness experienced in meditative concentration can actually permeate through the whole body and completely penetrate through every cell. That is a description from someone who's actually experienced, the jhanic bliss and so forth. So it's not unattainable, but you need to work at it. So the experience of those who have walked the path before us can actually give us an idea of what we can expect. But again, meditative concentration is a personal experience, and language can only give you so much in terms of description. Okay? So what they experience, and then you're thinking, well, they said it was experience X, Y, Z, but I've only got X and Z. What happened to Y? That would be a bit too rigid. So remember, the experience is personal, but in terms of the descriptions of the previous masters, in terms of what you can expect when you reach certain levels, it's to help give you a guidance when you're in meditation to check whether you're actually on the right track. Okay. So the next verse tells us, tame and draw together the three aspects. Concentration is maintaining single focus on the object. There is gradual separation from discrimination and progressive cessation of suffering and joy. So on the topic of methods to cultivate meditative concentration, all methods fall under the umbrella of taming the body and mind. So tame here means to subdue and to make gentle. The human mind is like a wild horse that is agitated, rough, and very difficult to handle. And the human mind sometimes is also like a very bad-tempered, unruly cow that just tramples and destroys all the crops. So this is what we have to tame and make more gentle. So to make the mind settle down and become gentle, we need to exert effort to train and subdue it. So that means once we can subdue the mind, it behaves according to our actual intentions. And this is why, since ancient times, the teachings tell us, or the teachings use the simile of taming a horse or herding cows. If you've ever tried to tame a horse or herd some cows, because I've had experience trying to herd some of the neighbours' cows off my paddock, it can be quite challenging. So very similar to meditation, trying to tame the mind. So tame here also means to bring harmony. Now in meditation, there are three aspects: the aspects of the body, the breath, and the mind, or mental activities. Now, these three aspects must synchronize harmoniously such that there are no disturbances. And only in such a state can you gradually enter meditative concentration. So at the start, the physical body, aspects of the physical body and the breath are important to learn to train yourselves in order to eventually help you be able to enter the state of meditative concentration. And then when you tame the mind, you also then need to draw together. And draw together here means to bring things together, to cause the mental attention to become focused such that it's no longer scattered. So in meditation, what should be tamed and drawn together are these three aspects of the body, breath, and mind. Now, in terms of taming the body, so this is a very rough outline. If you want to learn more, then definitely look into, detailed meditation courses. So taming the body should be in a stable and upright position, and you should feel comfortable in that position. And it should be in a position where you're not easily moved or distracted. Now, one should make the body free from feelings of being tensed or stressed. So in terms of tackling this aspect, this is why sometimes you'll see at the very start of the meditation practice, when you're sitting down, getting yourself in a comfortable position, you'll see some of the meditation masters or some of the monks actually do a bit of stretching and, rolling. Sometimes a good way to release stress and tension in the muscles is to actually tense it up first and then relax. Then you can actually feel what it should be like to be relaxed. So that when you're actually sitting in meditation, sometimes the body or certain parts of the body becomes tense and you don't realize it. And then when you do a sweep of the body, knowing that feeling will then allow you to gently relax that spot while you're in meditation. So make sure that the body is free from feelings of being tense or stressed. Sometimes the teachers will tell you that the eyes and the mouth should be closed and the tip of the tongue just gently touching the top of your palate. This is the more common. I have experienced open eye meditation before where you don't close your eyes. So, but what I'm presenting here is what you would generally be taught as beginners. Now, taming the breath means to gradually bring the breath, the in and out breath, into a state where it is subtle, long, and gentle. And the breathing doesn't make any noise. So you're not actually trying to intentionally make the breath long, like, and then you have. So it should be the process of bringing the breath to a state where it's subtle and long. It's something that actually can come naturally once the body is also in a comfortable position. And ideally, you can bring the breath to a point where it is so subtle, it can actually seem almost non-existent. So the breath is so gentle that you may not be able to detect it in a rough manner. So achieving this requires gradual practice, and you can't really rush this step. But as you get more and more used to doing meditations, if you do meditation more regularly, it'll become easier to get the breath and the body to the point of being comfortable and subtle, long and gentle. So taming the mind means to bring the mind to focus on or settle on your chosen mental object. So in meditation, you're not just sitting there trying not to, and the mind is just blank. There is a mental object that you focus on to draw your mind, your mental activity to something. And the mental object chosen should be something that helps the mind to tackle scatteredness or sleepiness or excitement and so forth. And that's why, depending on your state, so if you're entering meditation and say you had a really rough week at work, a lot of problems have come up, so your mind can be more scattered, then your mental object might be something to help you tackle scatteredness primarily. On the other hand, if you're generally quite sleepy, but you're very dedicated to your meditative practice, so, okay, this is meditation time, but I'm actually sleepy. So you might want to then choose a mental object that counteracts sleepiness more and so forth. Okay. Now, when the mind is drawn together and attains single-minded focus, then the mind becomes balanced and righteous, and naturally concentration can then arise. So these three aspects of the body, breath, and mind are mutually related, but the key aspect is the mind. When the body naturally is in a state of stability and calm, the mind and the breath become interconnected or interdependent, and the state of meditative concentration can then more easily arise. So given our aim when we practice meditation is to develop concentration, the question then becomes, when is one considered to have attained concentration? So how do I know I'm there, basically? The answer is when the mind maintains single focus on the chosen mental object and it can settle on the mental object continuously and effortlessly, then in that state, that is what we would call meditative concentration. So concentration is a Sanskrit word, and in Sanskrit, sometimes you'll often see the word samadhi instead. So samadhi is referring to concentration, or sometimes it's also translated as tranquility. So don't get that mixed up with insight. So sometimes when we talk about meditation, it's better to make clear whether you're doing just tranquility meditation or insight meditation. So what we're talking about here, tranquility meditation or developing concentration, is just to get the mind to settle. When you then move into insight meditation, there is mental activity because you are actually starting to discern the Dharma and so forth. So it's a different type of meditation. I can skip that page. I mean, for those of you who are interested, this is the Monier-Williams dictionary online. So if you're learning or if you see any Sanskrit word and you want to kind of check the dictionary meaning, this is my first go-to resource for your interest. So it'll give you a lot of answers in terms of how this word is used in what context and so forth and stuff like that. It's quite interesting to play around with this website. So we talked about, bringing things into harmony. So harmony includes the meaning of equality and righteousness. And in terms of the mind, it means to be free from excitement that causes you to be agitated or uplifted, as well as being free from dulling sleepiness. And often it's described as, moving up or moving down. So excitement is described as uplifting, and sleepiness is described as pulling you down. So it kind of relates to the physical body as well, because there are markers when you're meditating. So if you're sitting there in meditation, as the meditation teacher goes around looking, sometimes, but not always, if someone's mind becomes scattered and excited, their actual physically, they might actually, their head might actually start to move up. Because when you're sitting, normally you'd have your chin tucked in so that your spine is straight. But when in meditation, sometimes when the mind starts to wander off and there's excitement and, a whole story's playing out, physically it'll come through in terms of the head actually lifting up. So vice versa, the obvious one with sleepiness is that, you'll drop down, and often it's because you've dropped down, you realize sleepiness has come into effect. So, your mental state actually flows through to some physical markers. And that's how, as meditation teachers, they can see, and in some of the Zen cases, you'll get a whack with the meditation stick. So in terms of our attention, Attention is to draw the mind to focus on a single object and prevent that mind from being scattered or leaving that object. So when you begin your practice of meditation, the aim is to try and focus the mind on the mental object. And the instant the mind starts to wander and thoughts fly everywhere, you need to use mindfulness to bring the mind back to your object. If you let it wander too far, it becomes harder and harder to bring the mind back to the object. But of course, that's the whole, in effect, that's one of the main practice of meditation is, you versus your mind. So the mind keeps running off and then you're chasing it back. It's a long process, but over time, the mind, the distance in which it leaves you before you realize it's left becomes shorter and shorter. And as you develop mindfulness, it becomes like a rope to help you tie the mind to the object. And eventually, the mind will kind of realize this is where I should be. So with further practice, all these wandering thoughts that arise can still occasionally pop up. So even though the mind has settled on the object, occasionally it can still pop up. And that's why mindfulness is still required through the practice of meditation. But once you get to the point where the mind settles harmoniously onto the object without any distraction, and you can maintain that in a very almost effortless way, then you'll be able to experience the bliss and peace in both the mind and the body. And this means that you have attained meditative concentration. So there are physical markers and mental markers that once you understand what these markers are, they can help you in your meditation practice. Now, there are many levels of meditative concentration, ranging from the very shallow to the very deep states of concentration. And these are commonly grouped into the 4 absorptions or the 4 jhanas and the 8 concentrations or the 8 samadhis. So the changes can be viewed from 2 aspects. Now, one is the level of the mental discrimination that occurs, and the other is the feelings or emotions that you can experience in the different states of concentration. So from the aspect of mental discrimination, there is a gradual separation from very coarse discrimination in the mind. And the mind of sentient beings are always discerning things, discriminating things. So, for example, the mind of ordinary beings are either continually changing its thoughts or altering its understandings and behaviors. Now, for those who practice meditation and train their mind to focus on a single object, they can maintain consistency in each thought, and their minds are clearly settled to that one thought, which is their mental object. So the mind, for those who are practicing meditation, can enter into a state of extreme calm where it is also very clear. There's clarity. And only in such a state, when the mind is in that state, is there the ability to enter concentration. So there are some people whose wandering thoughts can be very subtle, or they can experience very subtle drowsiness, but they actually mistaken these states to actually be separation from discrimination, because the wandering is so subtle they think there isn't any wandering, which means I don't have any discrimination. That's a mistaken feeling or thought. Or sometimes drowsiness is so subtle, again, they mistaken that. Because when you're drowsy, there's no the activity of discrimination is not apparent or it's not obvious. So again, some people can mistaken that as being in a state of concentration as well. So remember, if you think my mind is not discriminating. I'm focusing on the object. The other thing to ask is, well, is there clarity as well? Am I clear about this? So there are a lot of things, you need to kind of reflect on and little checks to do here and there while you're in meditation. So what I've got in the table is just a very simple summary of what we were mentioning about discrimination and how it slowly disappears as the states of concentration gets deeper and deeper. The teachings tell us that in the first meditative absorption, the mind can still discriminate. In the first level absorption, the mind has coarse discrimination and differentiation, and it can also have subtle discrimination of analysis. So this is called the samadhi with differentiation and analysis. So this is just to indicate that in the first jhana, the mind can still engage in these mental activities. Now, between the first and the second level absorptions, there is what's called the intermediate state or the intermediate absorption. And here, coarse differentiation is no longer active, but there can still be subtle analysis. And then when you come to the second jhana, basically both the coarse differentiation and the subtle analysis are gone. So that's why the second jhana is called samadhi with no differentiation and analysis. And in terms of the qualities of this state, there's no manifestation of differentiation and analysis. So it's described in this state that there's no activity of speech as well. And then in the third jhana, at the third level, one directly experiences the mind's equanimity and purity, and the mind effortlessly maintains mindfulness and right understanding. So these absorption states are common to non-Buddhist practices. So they're not unique to Buddhist practices. So don't mistaken these level of concentration as levels of awakening or enlightenment. Now, from the aspect of emotion, so remember that was in terms of the gradual separation or dissolving away of the activities of discrimination. The other aspect is as concentration gets deeper, emotions and all that also slowly dissolve away. So from this aspect, there is a progressive cessation of the experience of suffering and joy. In the desire realm, the physiological experience can lead to feelings of suffering, while psychological experiences lead to feelings of anxiety, worry, and sorrow, and so forth. So you've got both the physical experience of suffering and the mental experience. And at the first absorption, the suffering and anxiety that comes from the disturbance of desires and joys will no longer arise. So this is referring to the really coarse type of desires and joys that come from our physical bodies and so forth and that. Now, in this state, due to the separation from desires and joys, one can then experience meditative happiness and bliss. Sometimes you will hear it as meditative joy. So to avoid confusion with the limit of language, I'll always refer to it as meditative bliss. So bliss that comes from meditation as opposed to the worldly five desires and so forth. Now, the meditative bliss that you experience is where happiness arises from the experience of tranquility of both the body and mind. And this bliss is an experience of delight in the inner mind. So the experience or the joy that you experience is a result of attaining meditative concentration. So at the second level, at the second absorption, although there is also happiness and bliss, this bliss is born from concentration, which is unlike in the first absorption, where the happiness and bliss comes from separation from desires. Okay. Now, nevertheless, delight fundamentally has the nature to cause us excitement. So this bliss, this desire that comes from separation from desires, or that comes from the tranquility of meditative concentration, it still fundamentally has the nature to cause excitement. So when one enters into the third absorption, the third jhana, at this level, it's described as separation from bliss with wondrous happiness. And in this absorption, there is no bliss and happiness like that in the earlier two states. So this then is an even a higher level of experience. So therefore, it's sometimes described as extreme happiness. And there is the saying, like the happiness from entering the third absorption. Now, of course, this extreme happiness is still incomparable to the happiness and joy and bliss of liberation when we finally are free from all defilements. Now, at the level of the fourth absorption, the higher the experience of happiness, also this higher or this extreme happiness also then subsides. And all that remains is a universal feeling of tranquility and impartiality. I tend to use impartiality. Sometimes you'll see the word equanimity. It's just in the past, someone has asked me, what is a feeling of equanimity? What does it mean? And so forth. And I find that some people, when you say impartiality, it helps them a bit better to feel. So impartiality, equanimity is synonymous in this case. So in this state, this fourth absorption is an even higher or more superior type of happiness than the earlier three. But again, remember that all these types of happiness and bliss, they can't even compare to that of liberation. So the idea is, often I've met someone before who, as a devout Buddhist, they practice meditation, but they actually tell me the only motivation they have is because they just want to experience the jhanic bliss. And, though that's not ideal, because our motivation to attain concentration should be for our practice of insight meditation to then develop wisdom. Our ultimate goal is wisdom so that we can penetrate into the transcendental truth, not to experience the jhanic bliss. And that's why here the stress is the bliss of liberation is even better. So put your goal even further. Don't stop at the jhanic bliss. Okay. So given the time, I think I'll stop here. And because the next class will be talking about some of the more common meditation practices suitable to practitioners of the human and heavenly vehicle. So this is what we will cover tomorrow to cap off this year's retreat. So any questions? No? Okay, you're all blissed out. Okay. All right, that'll bring class to an end today. Thank you.